All right, so this section of lecture is going to be about blood. Blood is specifically in Chapter 10. Again, the cardiovascular system as a whole is Chapter 11, if you have not really referred to your book for any reason at this point. So in general, the average person, we have about 5 liters of blood in our body. It makes up about 8% of our body weight. About 45% of that is actual blood cells, 55% of it's plasma, which is the liquid component of blood that's kind of this yellowy straw color. Blood has several different functions. It serves as a mode of transportation throughout the body, moves oxygen and nutrients to our cells so that they can carry out cellular respiration and generate ATP to power daily activities. It's going to pick up carbon dioxide and other waste products of metabolism and get rid of those. We're going to talk about the fact that it helps to regulate our body temperature through either vasoconstriction or vasodilation. So just as a quick example, we'll go into more detail about this eventually, that if you're cold, then your blood vessels are going to constrict. If you have some sort of traumatic event take place, your blood vessels constrict. And then if it's hot, your blood vessels are going to dilate. Your blood's also going to help to regulate pH within the body. Essentially by removing carbon dioxide. We will go into a lot greater detail about that when we get to the respiratory system, because carbon dioxide levels can change the pH of our blood pretty significantly. And then we're going to talk again about blood when we get to the urinary system, because all of our blood is filtered by our kidneys. And so we'll talk about water content within the body, within the bloodstream itself, again, when we get to the urinary system. And then blood also, of course, is going to afford protection as far as platelets with blood clotting and immunity with our white blood cells. And so we will come back to blood again in our next unit, the lymphatic system. And then just something real quick, too, that's typed here. So our blood is never blue. I don't think I've said that to this point. But when we color or have colored so far, red is used to indicate oxygen-rich blood, and blue is used to indicate oxygen-poor blood. But oxygen-poor blood is really like a dark, dull red color, like kind of maybe think the next time you're in my room to look at the color of the chairs, and then as it's exposed to oxygen, essentially, like if you were to cut yourself and it turns bright red, then it becomes really bright red when it's oxygen-rich. All right, so we're going to tie erythrocytes back to the skeletal system. So if you remember hema or hematopoiesis, that is the process by which red blood cells are made in our red marrow, and that these are known as, again, erythrocytes. They have this biconcave shape. It gives them a large surface area, and so as a result of that, hemoglobin is going to be a component of a red blood cell that iron and oxygen are going to bind to. We will deal more again with the oxygen loading and unloading on the blood when we get to the respiratory system. But this is what they look like. Okay, and again, they have no nucleus. They live for about 3 months, 120 days. And then again, they're made through hema or hematopoiesis in the red marrow. So that's a term that I do expect you to remember again. One just little blurb that's right here, I just mentioned that they have a large surface area for iron to bind to that hemoglobin and for oxygen to bind to. But then this one I didn't mention yet, that they do not actually use the oxygen that they are carrying. They are taking that oxygen to the cells of our body to deliver it to our cells to carry out daily activities, okay, as far as metabolism goes and generating ATP and burning sugars. And then next, leukocytes. So these are white blood cells. We will revisit them when we get to the lymphatic system. We will specifically be talking about them with the immune arm of the lymphatic system, the immune system, which is the functional component of the lymphatic system. There is a structural component as well. So more to come on that eventually. You've got little diagrams of each of your different types of leukocytes shown here. Some of them are phagocytic. If you remember from biology that amoebas, for example, surround and engulf their food by phagocytosis. So those particular types, that macrophage that you see there, they surround and engulf foreign pathogens like bacteria, viruses, and fungus. They will even surround and engulf other infected cells. Some leukocytes are going to produce antibodies. Those antibodies are going to disable foreign substances. More to come on that with the lymphatic system again. These all have a nucleus. Again, there's 5 different types you can see there. They're made in our red marrow just like red blood cells are, but they're going to mature in our lymphatic tissues. You've got 3 examples of lymphatic tissues listed there, the thymus, our tonsils, and our spleen. There's some other tissues, hence that, etc. Leukocytes, they can live for a few hours. Some of them live for years. And then some are responsible for removing damaged or old red blood cells and other leukocytes, kind of cleaning up the cells that are within blood itself. And then here, the circulatory pathways of our arteries and veins of our body, these are the way that these cells, these leukocytes, are actually going to get to the tissues where they need to function. They can slip in and out of our blood vessels really easily, so they're using those vessels as a circulatory pathway to get to where they need to go in order to do whatever it is that those different classifications do, because they all have different functions. All right, and so for just a quick picture, this is showing that our white blood cells, you've got 1 shown in each of these pictures, surrounded by a bunch of different red blood cells. 2 of them are known as agranulocytes, 3 of them are known as granulocytes, and then they each have a different name: neutrophils, lymphocytes, eosinophils, basophils, and monocytes that we see there. So again, in the lymphatic system, we'll talk about the function of each of these. Hopefully we'll do a lab where we're going to look for them under the microscope in each of these different categories, just kind of depending on our time with that. And then this last slide here, before we talk about blood typing. So platelets, these are fragments of really large cells that are found in our bone marrow. Their primary job is to control the loss of blood from the body as clots form. If you remember from first semester in the very first unit, this was a good example of a positive positive feedback system for homeostasis. So if somebody falls down and scrapes their knee, their arm, whatever, that platelets are going to be drawn to that area because of chemicals that are released as a result of that injury, and that draws the platelets to the area. That in turn causes our body to make more of the chemicals, which in turn draw more platelets, essentially kind of over and over that cascade effect until you get a nice clot and a scab so that you do not bleed from that area anymore. Then the final component, the plasma, so this is about 55% of our blood volume. It's a liquid component, it's mostly water, it's kind of a yellowy straw color, and in addition to containing the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the platelets, it's also going to contain other substances such as hormones, enzymes, waste products, nutrients, salts, gases, antibodies, just depending on what all is being carried at the time and where we're talking about within the bloodstream at the time. All right, so next we're going to talk about blood typing. So this is only going to deal with the ABO blood group, not the plus and minus aspect of blood types. And then we'll talk about that after we go through the ABO information. And I've got some things about genetics that are listed over here that I'll get to eventually as well to kind of recap on how you figure out a blood type. So in general, people can have either type AB blood, type B, type A, or type O blood. And this is just giving you the average frequency within the United States population. And then in red blood cells, okay, that blood has antigens present and antibodies present. So within your own body, you are going to have antibodies that are going to, and this is not just for blood typing, this is for lots of different things. You have antibodies within your body that are going to recognize antigens as either being foreign antigens or being self-antigens, okay? So, for example, somebody with type AB blood, they have no antibodies within their blood, okay? They have the antigens present, both the A antigen and the B antigen. So they are considered the universal recipient, okay? So they can take blood from somebody with A, somebody with B, somebody with AB, and somebody with O, right? Because they don't have any antibodies against these antigens. Somebody with type B blood, they have B antigens, and then they have anti-A antibodies. Somebody with type A blood has A antigens and anti-B antibodies, and then somebody with type O blood has no antigens present on the surface of the blood cells, and they have both anti-A and anti-B antibodies. So this is me, okay? So I'm the universal donor, right? So I can give blood to anybody, right? Because I don't have any markers on the surface of my blood cells to just, again, to mark that essentially, okay, to indicate what type of blood I have. Somebody with type A blood has A markers or antigens, right? And so they can only receive blood from somebody with A or somebody with O, because again, type O, we don't have any chemical markers known as antigens to mark our blood cells as such. And then type B works the same way as A. They have type B antigens and anti-A antibodies, so they can take from somebody with type B, excuse me, and somebody with type O, all right? When we look at this from a genetic standpoint, if you go back to biology, somebody with type AB blood has the blood type when you're looking at the alleles. They got one A allele and one B allele from each of their parents. Somebody with type B blood may have two B alleles and be homozygous, or they may have a B allele and a little I, which is what codes for type O, and be heterozygous. This is heterozygous as well, where these are codominant. This is where the B allele covers up the little I allele completely to give you type O blood, or sorry, type B blood. Type A works the same as type B. And then somebody with type O blood, which this is me, again, has two little I's, okay? So I'm going to encourage you to ask your parents if they know their blood type. Maybe they know yours as well. If it's like my family, both my husband and I have type O blood, and so our children can only have type O. And if we plug that into, for example, a Punnett square, okay, if that's my husband's alleles, those are my alleles, that my children can fall into any of those boxes. Okay, if we were, just to show you one other example, if we were to say somebody with type A blood and somebody with type B blood, just to give us some variety here, they could produce a child with type AB, a child with type B, a child with type O, sorry, that's the type A box, and then a child with type O. Okay, so they could produce children with 4 different blood types, depending on the combination of alleles and egg and sperm. Okay, the next slide shows you a little diagram. So this is showing that for type A blood, the A antigens are these white dots. For type B blood, they are these black dots. So then somebody with type AB blood would have both white and black dots as antigens, and somebody with type O would have none, okay? And then this is just explaining essentially the same information that's up on that other slide, just in a different way. All right, so now we're going to talk about the RH factor, which is, like my blood type is O positive, okay? So somebody can have 2 alleles and be positive as far as their blood type. With 2 pluses, they can have 2 negative alleles and have a negative blood type, or they can have 1 of each. And if somebody has 1 of each, then the positive is dominant over the negative, and that person will have a positive blood type. Okay, so this is known as the RH factor. It was named for the fact that it was studied in rhesus monkeys. It stands for this specific protein on the surface of the red blood cells that's going to code for having, again, the RH positive blood type or the RH negative blood type. So then we combine that with the ABO blood group. And so when people are having transfusions done, we do have to look at both components of this, okay? So for example, my blood type is O positive, so is my husband's, so are both of my children's. But we could not donate blood to somebody who is O negative. We also could not donate blood to anybody who's A, B, or AB negative, because we have the positive blood type. And then we're going to kind of explain a different type of situation besides just a transfusion in just a second, when I uncover this, as to how this essentially impacts a fetus is what we're going to talk about. All right, so this diagram's really kind of hard to see, okay? But we've got a woman on the left here. She's got negative, okay, or A negative blood type, and then we have a man on the right, and he's got the positive blood type. So those are a bunch of little negatives and a bunch of little positives, okay? So we've got a woman who's RH negative and her husband who's RH positive. And they have a child, and that child is RH positive, Okay, so that being said, it says if exposed to the Rh positive child's blood, then this woman is going to produce antibodies against those Rh positive proteins, and that's going to destroy those Rh positive blood cells, right? So when women are pregnant, if they have a negative blood type, they are their husband's blood needs to be typed as well, just to see if they're positive. But typically, in general, women that have a negative blood type, they're going to be given this shot called Rogam. And we'll talk about what that does in just a minute. So basically, if she is pregnant with a man's child that is positive, then her body's going to make these antibodies. It's typically not a problem with the first baby, but with the second baby, she's going to see those positive alleles as being foreign. And she's going to fight that off just like she would any foreign antigen that's not supposed to be in her body. And she's going to attack that. And that can cause death. Okay, lead to a miscarriage. That can also just cause, if the baby's born, that can lead to brain damage and other problems. Okay, if the baby is not just, if that doesn't result in a miscarriage. Let's talk about Rogam on the next slide. Hang on just a second. All right, so this slide explaining Rogam a little bit is super wordy, and I'm not even going to bother right now with explaining an immunoglobulin to you and what these IgI, anti-D, all of that stuff means. But basically, if somebody, again, a woman is Rh negative and she has a child that's Rh positive, Rogam is going to prevent her body from making antibodies against an Rh fetus. If it's not given to her, then her body's going to naturally make those antibodies and then attack any subsequent fetus after that first one. And again, it's typically not a problem with the first baby. So this is just going to prevent the body again from doing that and making those permanent antibodies. And then you'd have to have that again if you're Rh negative. And your husband's Rh positive, you'd have to have this with every pregnancy. And then just this, I know this might be, no, it's actually not that bad as far as looking at it. It says if Rogam isn't given to subsequent Rh positive babies, some of the other things that can happen, I was thinking this was on the other slide, that can just lead to anemia, okay, which is low iron in the blood, hypoxia, low oxygen, cyanosis, which is where the skin turns blue, if you remember that from the integumentary system, and then again can lead to brain damage and death. And in the grand scheme of things, this has pretty much disappeared. We don't see this happen unless somebody is not getting proper prenatal care. If you have any questions about blood typing, let me know.